When Kristi Noem's daughter finally broke her silence on the bitter feud between her mother and Donald Trump, no one was ready for what came next. In a moment that left the political world breathless, she didn't echo her mother's voice, she challenged it. What she revealed about the inner turmoil, the family's struggle behind the scenes, and her shocking take on the former president stunned not just political pundits, but everyday Americans who never expected to hear this from inside the Noem household. The air in South Dakota's political circle was tense for weeks, thick with whispers and speculative headlines. Kristi Noem, once considered a potential frontrunner for national office and a vocal ally of Donald Trump, had entered unfamiliar terrain, a cold and visible public fallout with the man who had previously boosted her political profile. The relationship that had once seemed unshakable, built on shared rallies, mutual endorsements, and a seemingly aligned vision for America, had crumbled in spectacular fashion. Political insiders traced the breakdown to multiple flashpoints. There was the disagreement over pandemic restrictions, where Noem had refused to implement certain measures Trump's team had quietly suggested. There was the controversy surrounding her use of state resources for personal travel, which Trump had initially defended but later used as ammunition when their relationship soured. Most significantly, there were the behind-the-scenes power struggles as Trump began to view Noem not as a loyal ally but as a potential rival for the conservative base he considered his own. Analysts were still dissecting the reasons, some citing power struggles, others pointing to backroom betrayals, when something unexpected happened. A voice that had never publicly entered the fray, Noem's daughter, chose this moment to step into the national spotlight. And what she said didn't just add fuel to the fire, it ignited an emotional, political reckoning that would reverberate far beyond the borders of South Dakota. It began innocently enough, with a cryptic Instagram story posted late at night, a close-up photo of an old family portrait, showing a younger, smiling Kristi Noem with her children at what appeared to be a campaign event from years earlier, was captioned simply, "We used to believe the same things. I'm not sure we do anymore." The photo itself was striking, genuine smiles, authentic interactions with voters, a sense of purpose that felt untainted by the harsh realities of national politics. Within hours, the post had been screenshot, shared, and dissected by every corner of political Twitter and beyond. The timing couldn't have been more explosive. Just days earlier, Trump had unleashed a particularly vicious attack on Noem via his Truth Social platform, calling her disloyal and ungrateful after she had declined to endorse his latest political venture. The post came as political reporters were scrambling to understand the full scope of their deteriorating relationship. Speculation swirled. Was this aimed at her mother, at Trump, at both? Conservative commentators debated whether the post represented a generational divide within the GOP, while liberal voices wondered if it signaled a potential crack in Trump's hold over Republican families. The ambiguity was deliberate, but it wouldn't last long. It wasn't long before she made it unmistakably clear. A lengthy open letter, shared to her personal blog and linked across social media platforms, gave the world a deeper and far more vulnerable view of what had been boiling beneath the surface. The letter, titled "When Politics Becomes Personal: A Daughter's Perspective," was raw, honest, and devastating in its emotional impact. In her own words, she described growing up in a house where politics was less about power and more about people. She painted vivid pictures of her childhood, accompanying her mother to town halls where farmers discussed drought conditions, sitting in on meetings with teachers worried about school funding, watching her mother genuinely listen to concerns from constituents who felt forgotten by Washington. "We believed in service," she wrote. "We believed that politics was about lifting people up, not tearing them down to make a point. I remember being so proud when Mom would come home from Pierre or Washington and tell us about the bills she'd helped pass, the people she'd helped, the problems she'd solved. It felt like we were part of something bigger than ourselves." But over the last few years, something had shifted. The tone, the values, the people they surrounded themselves with, it all changed. She described watching her mother's staff transform from seasoned policy experts to social media strategists whose primary concern was generating controversy. She wrote about family dinners where genuine policy discussions were replaced by tactical conversations about owning the libs and triggering the media. It felt like we were part of something noble, she added, and suddenly it started to feel like we were part of something angry. The people coming to our house weren't talking about helping South Dakota anymore, they were talking about hurting Democrats. There's a difference, and I think we lost sight of it. She described watching her mother try to maintain composure even as Trump publicly undermined her decisions, privately pressured her behind the scenes, and weaponized their prior closeness to paint her as disloyal. The letter revealed a pattern of behavior that had played out over months. Trump would make demands. Noem would try to find middle ground, and when she couldn't deliver exactly what he wanted, he would unleash public attacks that grew increasingly personal. There were moments, she wrote, when she looked so defeated, not because she was wrong, but because she was alone. I watched her sit at our kitchen table, scrolling through his posts about her, and I could see how much it hurt. This was someone she had campaigned for, defended, stood by through controversies that would have ended other politicians' careers, and when she finally tried to maintain some independence, some dignity, he turned on her like she was nothing. The letter detailed specific incidents that had never been reported publicly. She wrote about a phone call where Trump had berated her mother for 45 minutes about her handling of a local issue that had no national significance. She described a dinner party where Trump allies had openly discussed teaching Kristi a lesson about loyalty. Most painfully, she recounted a moment when her mother had broken down in tears after reading a particularly cruel social media post that attacked not just her politics, but her appearance and family. I realized then that this wasn't about policy disagreements or political strategy. She wrote, this was about power and control, and when you don't submit completely, you become the enemy. One of the most powerful portions of her letter focused on the idea of fear and how it had permeated the political circles they moved in. People are afraid to speak up around Trump, she said. I've seen grown men with years of political experience whisper like school children behind closed doors, terrified of being the next target. She described attending Republican gatherings where the atmosphere felt more like a court of petitioners than a meeting of equals. Politicians who had once spoken freely about their concerns now carefully measured every word, afraid that any hint of disagreement would be reported back to Trump's inner circle. She wrote about watching seasoned governors and senators, people she had once respected, essentially grovel for Trump's approval. You don't get to think for yourself anymore, she said. You either say what he wants you to say, or you out. I watched people I used to look up to abandon their principles just to stay in his good graces. And the worst part was seeing how normal it all became. We started accepting that this was just how politics worked now. The letter included a particularly striking anecdote about a closed-door meeting where several Republican governors had privately expressed concerns about Trump's post-election claims. Within hours, details of their disloyalty had somehow made their way to Trump's team, leading to a series of public attacks that effectively ended any further private dissent. She confessed that, for a long time, she had stayed silent because she didn't want to make things worse for her mother. I thought I was protecting her, she admitted, but now I realize silence doesn't protect, it only prolongs the pain. Her breaking point came, she said, when she heard a political consultant refer to her mother as collateral damage in Trump's latest strategy. The conversation had taken place in their own home, during what was supposed to be a strategy session about managing the fallout from Trump's attacks. The consultant, speaking to another advisor, had casually mentioned that Noem's reputation was acceptable collateral damage if it helped send a message to other potentially disloyal Republicans. That's when I knew, if we don't stand up for each other, even in families, we lose more than elections. We lose who we are. She described the moment as a complete awakening. I realized that to these people, my mother, who had devoted her life to public service, was just a chess piece, and if they were willing to sacrifice her for political gain, what did that say about the movement we were supporting? What followed was a cascade of emotions rarely seen from someone in her position. She wrote about how fame and proximity to power had strained their family bonds in ways she had never anticipated. Holiday dinners turned tense, with political consultants and staff members present even during private family time. Friends became potential sources of information for rival campaigns or media outlets, making genuine relationships increasingly difficult to maintain. Every private disagreement risked being twisted into a headline. She wrote, "We couldn't have normal family arguments anymore because there were always people around who might benefit from our conflicts. I found myself editing my words even at our own dinner table, afraid that expressing doubt or asking questions would somehow end up in a news story." She described the surreal experience of watching her mother's genuine moments of vulnerability become talking points for political opponents. Private struggles with policy decisions were dissected by cable news panels. Personal friendships were analyzed for their political implications. Even family photos were scrutinized for hidden meanings about political alliances. "We forgot what it meant to be human," she wrote. "Everything became about optics and messaging. I watched my mother practice being spontaneous. If that makes sense." She would rehearse casual conversations because she knew they might be recorded or reported. "We lost the ability to just be ourselves." She recalled moments when she tried to voice concern about Trump's rhetoric, only to be dismissed or told that he's just being strategic. But to her, it never felt like strategy, it felt like cruelty. "There's a difference between being bold and being brutal," she wrote. "We forgot that. Somewhere along the way, we started confusing cruelty with strength, and meanness with authenticity." The letter detailed several specific instances that had troubled her. She wrote about watching Trump mock a disabled reporter and feeling sick to her stomach when people in their circle laughed about it. She described her horror at the center-back chants directed at congresswomen of color, and her mother's visible discomfort when asked to defend such behavior. "I would ask Mom privately, 'How is this helping anyone? How is this making America better?' And she would say, 'Sometimes you have to break things to fix them.' But I never saw much fixing, just more breaking." She didn't hold back when it came to her personal disillusionment with Trump. In one of the letter's most quoted lines, she wrote, "When I was younger, I believed Donald Trump was a strong leader. Now I see he's just loud, and we've mistaken volume for vision for too long." That one sentence rippled across social media like a lightning strike. Thousands shared it, some with admiration, others with outrage, but the impact was undeniable. A new conversation had started, and she was leading it. The assessment was devastating in its simplicity. She wrote about how Trump's strength seemed to consist primarily of attacking people who couldn't fight back effectively. She questioned what was courageous about using the presidency to settle personal scores or punish critics. Most damning of all, she asked what Trump had actually built, as opposed to torn down. "Real leaders inspire people to be better versions of themselves," she wrote. "They unite people around shared values and common goals. They take responsibility when things go wrong and share credit when things go right. I've watched Donald Trump for years now, and I've never seen him do any of those things. He divides people, he blames others, he takes credit for everything good and responsibility for nothing bad. That's not leadership, that's just narcissism with a megaphone." In a follow-up interview days later, she elaborated further, sitting across from a local news anchor in what had become a nationally televised conversation. She appeared calm but resolute. The interview, which ran for nearly an hour, provided even more insight into her thinking and her family's struggles. She made it clear that this wasn't about turning on her mother or betraying the party. It was about redefining what it means to stand up for what's right. "We've all seen what happens when no one pushes back," she said. "You get a system built on fear, you get leaders who confuse obedience with agreement, and you end up with a movement that doesn't reflect the people it claims to represent." When asked about the potential consequences of her public statements, she was remarkably candid. "I know there will be backlash," she said. "I know people will question my motives or accuse me of seeking attention. But I've watched what happens when good people stay silent. The bad behavior gets normalized, the cruel becomes acceptable, and eventually, you wake up in a world you don't recognize." The response was predictably polarizing. Conservative media figures debated whether she had crossed a line, with some arguing that family loyalty should supersede political disagreements. Tucker Carlson devoted an entire segment to questioning her motivations, while others defended her right to speak independently. More moderate voices argued that her comments reflected a growing generational shift within the GOP. She's not alone, one commentator said. There's a whole wave of young conservatives who are tired of bending the knee. They want principle, not performative outrage. They want leaders who actually lead, not ones who just tweet insults at their opponents. Republican strategists were divided in their assessments. Some worried that public family disputes would damage the party's image, while others suggested that showing internal debate and independent thinking might actually strengthen the party's appeal to moderate voters. But beyond the punditry, something more human was unfolding. For every angry tweet, there were heartfelt messages from people who said they finally felt seen. One woman wrote, "My father was a Trump supporter, and we haven't spoken in a year. What you said helped me find the words I never could." A young man posted a video saying, "Thank you for showing us that loving your family doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they stand for." The letters and messages poured in from across the country. Military families wrote about their struggles with Trump's attacks on military leaders. Evangelical Christians expressed their discomfort with having to defend behavior they knew was wrong. Small business owners shared their frustration with a political culture that seemed more interested in fighting than governing. "I never expected the response to be so personal," she said in a later interview. "I thought it would be mostly political analysis and partisan arguments. But instead, I am getting letters from people thanking me for giving them permission to think for themselves, to question leaders they had supported, to have complicated feelings about politics and family." Through it all, Kristi Noem remained publicly silent about her daughter's comments. However, sources close to the family painted a complex picture of private conversations and emotional reckonings. An anonymous aide reportedly told a national outlet that Noem was deeply moved, but concerned about the political implications. According to multiple sources, the governor had always encouraged her daughter to think independently, but never expected such a public declaration. "It's love mixed with a little heartbreak," one family friend said. Kristi is proud of her daughter's courage, but devastated by the circumstances that made it necessary. Private conversations between mother and daughter were said to be emotional, but respectful. "They are both strong women with strong opinions." Another source said, "They don't agree on everything, but they love each other. That's what makes this so hard, and so important." Perhaps most striking was how her daughter concluded her original statement. "I still love my mom," she said, "and I know she loves me. But love means telling the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She spoke of a desire for healing, not just within her family, but within the broader conservative movement. "We don't have to agree on everything," she said, "but if we can't even talk to each other anymore, then we are not building a movement, we are building a wall. And walls don't make you stronger, they make you isolated." The message resonated far beyond political circles. Marriage counselors reported an increase in couples seeking help to navigate political disagreements. Family therapists noted more sessions focused on bridging generational and ideological divides. Religious leaders found themselves mediating between congregants with different political views. In the days following her revelation, she's continued to speak, joining youth panels, podcasts, and even writing a column for a major national newspaper. Each appearance has drawn significant attention, with her words carefully parsed for their political implications and their broader meaning. In her most recent piece, she touched on a recurring theme: accountability. "I'm not asking anyone to abandon their values," she wrote. "I'm asking them to look in the mirror and ask whether the values they are defending still align with the tactics they are tolerating." She pointed out the danger of elevating any one person, Trump or otherwise, above criticism. "When a movement stops listening, it stops learning," she wrote, "and when it stops learning, it starts to decay." That sentiment resonated far beyond politics. Educators, veterans, small business owners, all chimed in to echo her sentiment: integrity matters. And silence is not neutral. In the long arc of political families, there are often defining moments, times when private lives intersect with public consequence. This was one of those moments. Her voice, once hidden in the wings, is now front and center, and she's using it not to tear down, but to rebuild. The questions she raised about leadership, loyalty, and family have sparked conversations in living rooms, churches, and community centers across America. Political science professors have begun using her letter as a case study in generational change within political movements. High school debate teams are discussing the balance between family loyalty and personal conscience. America has seen political feuds before. We've seen alliances fracture, leaders turn on each other, and families endure unspeakable pressure. But rarely do we see such a measured, heartfelt, and unflinching account from someone directly inside the storm. Her words didn't come with malice, they came with purpose. A purpose that, judging by the reaction, may have started a quiet revolution. Whether you agree or disagree with her politics, her bravery is undeniable. In an era where silence is often rewarded and loyalty is weaponized, she chose to speak truth, not just to power, but for the countless people who feel voiceless within their own families, communities, or movements. And that's what shocked America. Not just the content of her message, but the fact that she had the courage to say it at all. In a political climate where conformity is often demanded and dissent is punished, she chose to risk everything for the sake of truth and integrity. Her story serves as a reminder that real change often begins with individual courage, that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that was never supposed to speak, and that love, real love, sometimes requires the courage to disagree with those we care about most. If you found this story powerful, moving, or thought-provoking, do us a favor, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We'll continue bringing you stories that challenge the narrative, reveal what others won't, and give a platform to voices that deserve to be heard. Let's keep the conversation going, together.